Welcome. And for those who don't know me, I'm Jane Hotchkiss, and I'm a member of the Select Board, and I have the extreme honor of moderating this discussion today. And it's come to our attention that there was confusion between the agenda and the postings, and so many folks in the room thought we were going to start the process at 9 versus refreshments at 9, and the meeting starting at 9:30. So we've decided to kick it off now. And I'm going to begin by just saying thank you to everybody who's here. I wish we had standing room only, but it's really good to see as many chairs filled because of all of the town benefit meetings, this is one of the ones that I'm really proud that we do. And I know that every year I learn from it. And this is my 5th year on the Select Board, and I've been on other boards and committees, and every year I learn all the things I didn't do quite right the year before. That's both because open meeting law and many of our other processes are rich and change, and because, we're all human, and I can practice, but I'm never going to get it perfect, and I suspect I'm not alone. So, welcome. We're going to have 3 presentations by 3 very skilled and valuable members of our town. The first is from Ground Zero, from Kari Tari, our incredible town clerk, who should be on everybody's speed dial. No, I'm kidding, Kari. But is a resource. And if you don't use her regularly, you might want to think about at least knowing who she is and realizing all the different ways she can be used as a resource. She's going to talk about open meeting law and public records. And in that, you will be surprised at how many things you learn that you thought you knew. Our second session is going to be from Carmen Reese, our phenomenal town moderator. And if you don't recognize her, that means you're not going to town meeting, and I can't imagine why you're here if you're not already a junkie. Oh, and before I get any further, I'm realizing, again, on my bad, we are being recorded. And this whole presentation will be available on the sidebar on the town clerk's website under the heading of committee resources. So if you miss something or you want to review something, or more importantly, if you're on a board or committee or you know somebody who's interested in being on a board or committee, send them to look at this when they're thinking about this. Because as much as it's great to see a lot of familiar faces, I wish I didn't know anybody in the audience. Because we're always looking to increase the number of people who volunteer. And that's what we all are. With the exception of Kari and various of our fabulous town staff, we're all volunteers. But as volunteers, we're also municipal employees the minute we take the oath of office and join a board or committee, whether you're elected or you're a committee member. And that's why we all have to pay a lot of attention to the process, which keeps us focused on the tasks at hand and hopefully out of our own way. And our final presentation is going to be from the chair of my board, the Select Board, Mike Lawson, and he's going to be the place where everything comes to rest, which is what could possibly go wrong. How do you run an effective meeting? And he's far better at it, as any of you have seen me, than I am. But we can always get it better. And I have been to so many different town committee meetings as a liaison, and I am always struck by this skill that we have volunteering in the town. So mostly I'm grateful to be up here and to see all the faces in the room. I hope there are more that come in. And with that, I am just going to turn it over to Kari. I'm sure, just like I always do, I've forgotten some critical pieces of information. I will try and pick them up as we go. The other piece I was going to say on the process of today is questions that have to do with, for instance, Kari's going to start with Kari's presentation. If you don't understand something, put your hand up, I'll find you during the presentation. If there's once she's finished her presentation, if there are discussion points you want to bring up or thoughts that it's created for you, that's an appropriate time after she presents. We want questions and we want to have a dialogue. It's a workshop, that's the purpose. But the only other thing I want to recognize, and we've already we started a little early but late for some, is that we're all time constrained. It's your Saturday morning. So let's not go on and on. Most of us spend too much time speaking in public, And thoughts and ideas are great, but those can be sidebars too. So questions, comments that really enrich the workshop, awesome. But let's try and stay focused on the purpose of today. So without more, I'm going to bring over Kari.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you all for being here this morning. Let's see if I can do this. So from the town clerk's perspective, effective governance is about compliance with the laws, regulations, and policies that are in place to keep our government accessible and transparent. The goals and authority of each board and committee vary greatly. Whoops. Okay, now I have to figure this out. But you do find common ground in the processes that are guided by the conflict of interest, open meeting, and public records laws. So before your first meeting, you need to, and once you're appointed, the town clerk's office job really begins. Qualifying for office, I have to use this because I don't know how to. Qualifying for office is required for each and every committee you're appointed to before you attend your first meeting in an official capacity. Then begins your homework, so to speak, to review the legal summaries that are included in the committee handbook that you receive when you're sworn in. Then you'll be taking the online ethics training and return the acknowledgments and the training certificate to the town clerk's office. These are mandatory for a very good reason. You're all dedicated to serving the town in the capacity of your appointment, but you don't want that good work that you're doing to be undermined by having missed some process in the law. You should also have a copy of your committee's charge to understand the responsibilities and limitations of your committee's work. Hopefully you've all seen your committee's charge, so you know what I'm talking about. Some committees are policymaking, like the Select Board and School Committee. Others are regulatory, like Planning Board and Zoning Board of Appeals. And yet others are advisory, like the PEG Access Advisory Committee and the Pollinator Advisory Committee. Regardless of the functions, you're bringing value, but the functions can be fundamentally different, and you need to understand that from your charge. Because the laws relate to your work as a committee and your conduct as an individual, I always like to just repeat the oath at these workshops. So let's do that now. I state your name, promise to faithfully and impartially perform the duties of the office to which I've been appointed. The oath qualifies you to vote at committee meetings and designates you as a municipal employee. Be aware that you're wearing your committee hat, so to speak, when you're representing your board or committee, not yourself as an individual. And impartiality is an important factor when you're appointed to a board or committee. John F. Kennedy said in his address to Congress on April 27, 1957, "The basis of effective government is public confidence, and that confidence is endangered when ethical standards falter or appear to falter. Will your neighbor have a project that affects your property, or will an organization you're affiliated with appear before your board for a permit? Anything that might affect or appear to affect you personally should lead to a phone call to the State Ethics Commission. They provide confidential advice and will not give me advice about your potential conflict. A chat with the attorney of the day can result in filing a disclosure or of interest or an appearance of conflict of interest with your appointing authority. Once you have done that, then you might either need to recuse yourself from the meeting, depending on the conflict, or it's okay to continue to meet because you don't believe that the conflict will affect your impartiality. And that's something that only you can decide, but it is a good idea to have that legal advice. Categories of conflict. These are only some of them. You cannot use your position to gain favor for financial benefits. Oh.
Is that telephone number for that person available on your website, or where would it?
It is in the slides, it's in your handout, and it is also available on the website. And you can always call me and I will give you that information. Often people will call me and ask for advice about those things. I can't give advice on that, and I can't get advice on that on your behalf. You have to call directly. Oh, yes, we do have the handouts there. So you can't use your position to gain favor or financial benefits for you or an immediate family member. The Ethics Commission posts public enforcement decisions on their website under several categories. An example of acceptance of gifts: an emergency management company admitted to violating Section 3 of the Conflict of Interest Law by offering and providing a Boston Harbor cruise to public officials in an effort to engender goodwill. They paid a $2,000 civil penalty. Under self-dealing, a planning board member was fined $6,000 for violating the Conflict of Interest Law by participating in matters that affected 2 private companies in which he had a financial interest. And under divided loyalty, a planning board member acknowledged violating a section of the law when, in his private capacity as a real estate broker, he represented private clients before his own board. Further, he also took steps to further the goals of 2 development proposals, which he, as a real estate broker, had a financial interest in. So you can see the tentacles sort of spread out, and you really have to think about what your potential financial or personal gain or that for a for a family member might be. And it's not, as I said, limited to actual conflict. The appearance of conflict can be just as damaging in public trust. Here's the number. It's complicated. So when in doubt, ask. Moving on to the open meeting law. The educational materials that are included in your handbook are the open meeting law guide, the law, regulations, and checklists. It's a lot of material to review, but it's critical to understanding how to properly post, conduct, and make record of governmental meetings. On the administrative side of the open meeting law, you want to make sure that the space is available before posting a meeting to meet at that location. You want to decide who's going to forward the agenda to the town clerk's office and follow up that we received it, because sometimes things go into spam. So you want to make sure, especially if you're a new committee starting out, that there is a clear chain of communication. If you're not sure what to include on the agenda, there's a checklist on page 81. So besides the when and where, it's important to include enough detail that a reasonable person would know what to expect from the meeting. In other words, should they attend? Yes?
An item that's not on the list?
So an item, the question is, can you discuss an item that is not on the agenda? The agenda, and I'll get into this a little later, because you can add things to the agenda after the initial posting, but let's talk about that in a little bit. So it's not enough to have the doors of the meeting open. You have to provide the public with enough detail to know whether they actually want to show up. For instance, when Select Board renews liquor licenses, they have to name the establishments that are getting the liquor licenses. If a regulatory board is reviewing an application, they're providing who the applicant is, what is the address of the application, and what is it about. Those are really important factors. If you're reviewing a report, name the report in the agenda. What is it that you're reviewing? Minutes. What are the dates of the minutes that you're going to be reviewing? If you have public or open forum as an agenda item, that's okay because you can't anticipate what the public is going to say. So how can you possibly post it? And you want public participation. However, if those public forums lead to significant issues, you'll want to schedule those for another meeting because there may be some homework for you to do. There may be a lot of other people who are also interested, and you want to be fair to your board members and to the public and give them a chance. An example of a vague agenda comes from a complaint filed where committees listed in the meeting notice the words host agreement, land development, and non-opposition letter as topics. Helpful, right? So it turned out that these topics related to the approval of a host community agreement with a cannabis cultivation facility. Why would that be of interest to anyone? So the agenda clearly didn't sufficiently alert members of the public that the board would be discussing a marijuana establishment. So the remedy for an example like this, which the board realized and did on their own, was to post a public hearing so they didn't make a decision, they didn't finalize anything at that meeting. They went back, they thought about it, and they opened it up to the public. And then after that public process, they came back. So there was no further action for them to take because they had realized and remedied the situation. We all make mistakes. So you look at process. You don't take it personally. You look at process. The process was flawed. How do we fix the process? Let's go back and let's let the public in. The agenda must be posted to the public at least 48 hours before the meeting. That does not include weekends or holidays. So if you have regularly scheduled meetings, like many of the regulatory boards, they will send us, we've already gotten calendars for 2020. Those are the anticipated meeting dates. That doesn't satisfy the legal requirement, but it triggers us to say in the town clerk's office, is there an agenda? And to contact you to say, do you have an agenda before that 48-hour deadline? If you have a Monday meeting, we need that by Thursday. If you have a Monday meeting at 4 p.m., don't wait till 5 p.m. on Thursday to send us because that's less than 48 hours when you're not including weekends and holidays. If a meeting has to move because you have a larger than anticipated crowd that you know about before the meeting starts, that's okay. You post the notice of the new meeting location at the original location, and you consider maybe delaying the start of the meeting so that people who show up at the original location have time to get to, from the hearing room in the townhouse or from 141 Kais Road over to the Harvey Wheeler Community Center, for instance, at 5 p.m. So you want to make sure that the public has access. So according to the law, the notice must be printed in a legible, easily understandable format and must contain the date, time, and place of the meeting, as well as a list of the topics that the chair reasonably anticipates will be discussed. Open meeting law, as I mentioned, does not require the public body to anticipate the course of deliberation or the outcome of a discussion, only that it identify the anticipated discussion with sufficient specificity to reasonably advise the public of issues at the meeting at the time that the agenda is posted. For instance, when a redevelopment authority posted an agenda to discuss street and bridge projects that a vendor had failed to maintain, the authority voted to terminate the contract with the vendor. The vote was not part of the agenda, but it rose organically from the discussion. The Division of Open Government found that there was no violation of the open meeting law. Once the agenda is posted, it may be changed in less than 48 hours. If the meeting, before 48 hours of the meeting, if the chair did not reasonably anticipate the agenda item earlier. When you make such a change, you have to note what the change is and forward that amended agenda to the town clerk's office. And the law requires that there's a date and time stamp. Well, we put those online. The website is our official posting location, so there is a date and time stamp electronically available. And the web also shows previous versions of the agenda, but you really should draw attention to what the change is on the agenda. If you know that excuse me, a new item has generated a lot of interest and you're adding it on the morning of the meeting, you might want to rethink that, because now there is something that has high public interest. The law says you can add, it's something new. The law says that you can add that, but do you really want to add that if it's going to generate a lot of public interest? So you have to make a judgment. An example of a change, agenda changes would be a continuation of an application before a regulatory board because it's not ready. So it would be marked as continued, and often they highlight that agenda. Discussion about correspondence or a complaint that comes before the board, and maybe the complaint is something that needs to be addressed. That would be a fair item to put in because the chair didn't have knowledge. It's important for the governmental body to have an opportunity to deliberate on it. So it's recommended that the committee elect a chair and a clerk annually. The chair sets the agenda and runs the meeting. Anyone may propose agenda items, but the chair has the ultimate discretion over what is on the final agenda. Committee members may not deliberate outside of a posted meeting, but discussing the time and location of a meeting is not considered deliberation. Forwarding an agenda item to a chair is not considered deliberation either. A quorum is a simple majority of the established membership of the public body, unless otherwise provided in a general or special law or other provision. If you don't have a quorum, you don't have a meeting. Without a quorum, you aren't deliberating on committee business, and you'll make no committee decisions, and you will have no minutes. For example, in a 5-person committee, 3 is the quorum. 2 is not. 2 is a subquorum. 2 people from that 5-person committee may discuss committee business. But if either of those 2 people speaks to a 3rd person, now they've violated the open meeting law through serial communication. This can happen very easily via email or even Facebook postings. If it's something to do with the work of your committee, you have to be careful. Yes?
What about text messages? Phone conversations?
Any form of communication. So what you don't want is to, especially as a member of the public, to go to a meeting and find that everyone's ready to make a decision and it's all the same decision and there seems to have been deliberation, but you go to all the meetings and you don't know when it happened. So that can be the result of an inadvertent serial communication where, people aren't directly talking to each other. You don't have that group of quorum discussing, but somehow that information has filtered to all the members. So that would be serial communication. So there are exemptions to the quorum rule. For instance, a social gathering, a workshop. Today you're not discussing committee business. If there is a quorum present, it doesn't matter because you're not here as a public body. Site visits are also an exception as long as there is no discussion. That means there's no discussion. There are no questions asked. A site visit is a visual of whatever is being reviewed. If there is any discussion, if there are any questions for the applicant, That has to be done in an open session. Now, some committees have found that having an open meeting, and some applicants, I should say, don't want the public on their property, and that is their right. So then how do you resolve the issue of, having questions, you write down your questions, and then the applicant comes and how do you do that back and forth? So having a meeting off-site at the edge of the property is allowed, and then going onto the property with just the quorum and the applicant to look at things, and then coming back to the edge of the property to ask questions or discuss, and going back and forth like that satisfies that requirement, because now the public knows the questions that are coming up from the site visit. Yes?
What would you call a field trip where the committee is doing some research of best practices?
A field trip of best practices relating to a specific.
Another organization that might give us some ideas. As
So,
opposed to an applicant or something like that.
so if a quorum is going, so the question is, what if a committee is going on a field trip to do some research or gather information from an outside source. So if it's committee business and you're a quorum, you need to post that. Date, time, location. Excuse me, so that the public can participate. The alternative is having a subquorum, which is a perfect segue. Subquorum is less than a majority, who would then report back to the committee. If the committee designated 2 people to go and said, you 2 go and meet and then report back to us, because more than one person has been designated, a subcommittee has been formed. Now that subcommittee needs to post the time, date, and location, and what it's about, and then report back. If one person on that committee is designated as the one who is going to gather the information and report back, and other people volunteer to accompany that person, that is not a subcommittee, because only one person has been designated to do that. If one person has been designated to write a 200-page report and do all the research in order to, and then other people volunteer to help, that's not really practical. So probably that would better be suited to be a subcommittee, because it's not really feasible. So you want to be sure that it doesn't become a way to avoid open meeting law. There are ways that you can work within it, because government wheels turn slowly, because transparency is more important than efficiency. It takes a long time for regulatory bodies to approve applications for a reason, because it is a public process. It has to be a public process. Let's talk about recording meetings. This workshop is recorded. Minuteman Media Network records a lot of meetings. The chair announces that the meeting is being recorded. By the same token, a member of the audience may also record a meeting. They just have to let the chair know so that the chair can announce it. That's really important. But anyone can record a meeting. And the door has to remain open unless there's an executive session. Everyone has a right to attend. Public participation. The public may, of course, attend the meeting. We all know that. The public may address the meeting only with permission of the chair. They have to follow the rules of conduct. They may comment if allowed, but that comment time may be limited by the chair. They may not disrupt the meeting. The committee is not required to respond to the public comment. Sometimes it's not possible because they're asking a question that you just don't have the information about. You acknowledge the public comment. The public may not disrupt the meeting. But you want to make sure that you encourage public participation.
All right, and themselves when they are addressing the meeting?
Yes, the public should identify themselves when addressing the meeting. Remote participation is a policy that is allowed by the select board. Sometimes a member wishes to participate and they are not able to attend. So the select board policy allows one person per meeting to attend remotely. That person cannot be used to establish quorum. On a 5-member committee, you have to have 3 members present. You can't have 2 members and have that 3rd person participating remotely. The person participating remotely may not chair the meeting, and they need to let the chair know 48 hours in advance of the meeting. Question?
So going back to public attendance, if a public person makes a comment and states who they are, should that be recorded in the minutes
Yes.
with
Yeah.
their name and address?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. thanks.
I don't know if the law actually requires that a person state their name and address. I know for town meeting it is something, but
I'm just wondering if it's their choice or not, or if we need to record it.
if someone is coming in and they have a concern, it is in the committee's benefit to record it. This is you're creating an historical document. You're creating something, and you want to know what kind of discussion. You don't need to have transcript discussion, but if someone is raising a significant issue because of where they live or something like that, you want to include that level of detail.
This is also a question related to public participation and the person identifying themselves. I went to the Inspector General training back in May for committees. He stated that cannot be a requirement that
Yeah.
the person, so I'm a bit confused as to
No, I think you're right.
which we
Yeah.
should follow.
For town meeting, people need to state their name and address. For a public meeting, like a public records request, people can state their name and address, but any member of the public can attend for any reason. So yes, I apologize. I reversed that.
A detail on public participation. Is there a distinction between resident and non-residents for that?
No, public is public. Yeah, that can be anyone. The other thing for remote participation is that all votes must be roll call votes, and they must be recorded as such. Roll call is everyone is indicating their name and how they vote. Yes.
And vote?
The remote, yes, absolutely. The remote participant can vote. Yes. And the roll calls are reflected in the meeting minutes. Someone else have a question? Yes.
All full members, how does that work with calculating the number for a quorum and whether a quorum is present? Because sometimes they're sort of like alternate
If
or
they're
associate members
right,
or something.
if there are generally alternate or associate members are there to make sure that quorum can be met, so they have the authority to be in the place of a member if there isn't a full member present.
Count of full members? What
No, if you
constitutes-
have associate members, then it would be the membership that is there.
No, but I'm saying how do you calculate the total possible membership?
So the
In other words, if you
membership
had
is
5
based
full
on.
members to associates, what is a quorum?
So the quorum is the number of people that are, the number of seats for that committee.
Thank you.
So, right, full members, thank you, Anita. Full member seats for that committee, so that if you have 4 associates and you have one person who's not present, you don't suddenly expand to nine people. It's the number of seats.
One question on remote participation. What
Mhm.
about for executive session? Is that,
I'm sorry?
can you remotely participate in executive session?
I don't believe that is allowed in the policy. So the select board has determined that that is not allowed. So that brings us to executive sessions. Speaking of roll call vote. Executive sessions are excluded from, yes.
Thank you so much. Does that mean that if you are a remote participant in executive session, that you're not even allowed to listen to the discourse? Or does that mean you're not allowed to participate, or does that mean you just really cannot bring somebody in remotely to an
That's right.
executive
You
session?
can't bring someone in remotely to an executive session.
Thank you.
All members that are participating need to be physically present. So executive sessions excluded from public participation and are allowed for very limited reasons. The 10 purposes are listed in your handbook on page 37. And as you can see, there's a checklist for that. And that's on page 83. So I should mention that the handbook has, every year, the handbook gets revised a little bit. We're trying to make it more user-friendly, and hopefully this one is it. The legal information is in the front. The acknowledgements are right in the beginning of the handbook because those need to be returned. Then there are checklists, there are guides, and public records law, and I'm trying to think of all the other sections, and remote participation. So all of those things that you might need to refer to during a meeting are included in there. We are also going to aim to have committee handbooks and committee charges in the meeting rooms so that if there's ever a question that you feel you'd like to quickly reference, obviously you're not going to start researching during a meeting, then you've got the tool there for you. So the meeting notice for an executive session has to include as much detail as you can possibly allow. And also there's very specific language to enter certain types of executive session that the chair must say out loud before entering. And entering the session has to be done by a roll call vote, and then all votes within executive session are through roll call vote. Minutes are required for executive session, and eventually minutes have to be reviewed and released. There may be information that is redacted because of confidentiality issues, but this is a governmental body and it's a public document. Some part of it is a public document. Which brings us to meeting minutes. For every meeting, whether public or executive session, as I said, you have to make a record of what you discussed in detail and the exact wording of any votes that you take. The minutes are an official record of the meeting, and they will be referenced in the future. So you have to think about that when you're creating the record. Drafting minutes.
I have wondered when the minutes are posted for the public. There's several committees that I follow just on the internet because I want to know what's going on and whether I should go, but I can never find the minutes, and they're so far out of date. So
That is a really good question, and we are working, the town clerk's office is working on getting all of those into the meeting and agenda module on the website. What's happening is often there are minutes that are on the committee's own webpage, but they're not all in one centralized location, and that doesn't help the public. So agreed. We are working on fixing that. We are also tracking it, and we are following up with boards and committees to get those minutes. So if you haven't heard from us yet, you will. If we have agendas and we don't have the minutes for those agendas, we want to know, was the meeting canceled? If you held the meeting, where are the minutes? If you have notes, if you don't have more than a draft, you need to approve the minutes. If you have a draft and those people aren't present anymore, you still have to approve the minutes. People who weren't at the meeting can still approve the minutes. If you only have notes, then you have to construct minutes from those notes. And there's also some confusion on how you actually access the minutes. If you look on the meetings and agendas, it says download under agendas, and then there's a little box with a check mark in it if there are minutes. And because it's sort of inconsistent, it's not clear that you have to click that checkbox to actually view the minutes, as opposed to the download. If you click the download, then all you get is the agenda. You're shaking your head. Well, there are very many
checks.
And just to interject on that point, as a select board member, we
That's an
are
important
all
point.
assigned as liaisons to different committees, and we are making an effort to become the goad on minutes to all of our committees, so be warned. It's part of our job now. It always has been, but we're going to be a little bit more resilient on that.
It is. It's important for the permanent record. That's the town clerk's concern, that we have it for the permanent record. It's important for you in the day-to-day and moving forward and seeing what the progress is, because you might have missed the meeting. There may be an audio recording, but you don't have time to look at the audio recording, and you shouldn't need to. The obligation is to create minutes. Drafting minutes and getting them approved can take several meetings, because you can't work on or collaborate through the drafts to the final version outside of a meeting. One person can forward the draft minutes, the clerk, who would be drafting those minutes or responsible for that, could forward the draft to everyone, and if people make edits, you can't then start discussing those edits. Often edits will flow back to one person, whether it's a person designated by the committee or a staff person, and that's okay. But that compiled document can't be shared outside of a meeting, because that has people's opinions, and you can't send your opinion, even with agenda items. You can't send your opinion broadly out to all the committee members, because now you're deliberating. Question? Yes.
The question I have is, in executive session, how are the minutes?
In executive session, how are the minutes handled? They should be handled in the same way. They should be deliberated upon and discussed in executive session.
Can they be distributed through email, or must they be distributed at?
Can the draft minutes be distributed through email, or must they be delivered under executive session by hand, a paper copy?
That is a good question, and I'm not sure. I don't think the law or any regulations discussed how they get transmitted. So if it's email only to those members, then,
But if they're emailed to those members, that is a public record, correct?
no, because it's only to those members. If they were emailed to those members and one other person, then they would become public record. Someone outside of the committee. That committee is entitled to hold an executive session.
So then every member of every committee has to have a Concord.gov email address so that no one could access their emails outside
So I will be talking briefly about public records law, and that affects your personal emails only as far as the government information that's contained on them.
This is an interesting question, because how do you then protect the confidentiality of executive session? Email is so much more volatile. I don't know.
Yes, that's a really good question. That's a question for maybe the select board to take up. Not
Lucky
now,
us.
though. Not now.
Thank goodness
At a
we're
future
recording
meeting
this.
that's properly posted. Yeah, because I don't, it's not addressed, so, and I don't know what the practice is.
I might suggest, sorry about that. I might suggest that the better practice would be not to email executive committee minutes, just for the simple practical problem that a public records request presents. When there's a public records request, if executive committee meeting minutes are still subject to a privilege and not ready for release to the public, that's a real sorting problem for whoever has to review those records before they get released to the public, and accidents can happen. So it just seems to me that it would probably be better practice not to be emailing executive committee minutes.
I think that's a very, very good point. I don't know what the current practice is among those boards that have executive session. So so we've talked about the drafts. Meeting minutes checklist, of course. You need to have enough information. So this is getting back to, did I get ahead of myself? I did. So meeting minutes have to be approved, should be approved in a timely manner. That is generally by the Attorney General's office considered 3 meetings or 30 days, whichever is later, with the understanding that you need to deliberate in public. You do need to release and you do need to approve those minutes eventually, though.
Ari?
Yes.
It's 3 meetings or 3 weeks, because some committees, of course,
Right,
don't.
3 meetings or 30 days, whichever is later. So that if you're meeting once a month, you have the opportunity to then deliberate. So the minutes checklist, which is also in the handbook, you need to provide enough information that a reasonable person has a good idea of what happened at the meeting. Documents discussed or referred to need to be listed in the minutes, and they need to be kept as a packet, not necessarily with the minutes, but you need to hold on to that material for 6 months as the record of the meeting. It's a good idea sometimes to just keep that packet together because it's a good contextual reference for the meeting. Yes, Diane.
Kari, I believe I recall that the public has a right to see the notes at a certain time period after a meeting. Can you remind us what that time period is?
So if the public, and that is a public records issue, but if the minutes exist, then they need to be turned over in 10 days of the request.
Within 10 days of the request?
Within 10 calendar days of the request. If the minutes or draft minutes exist.
But the draft minutes exist. So, I mean, if, for instance, if I could not attend a meeting and I wanted to see the draft of the minutes, at what time am I allowed to ask for those, just to review the draft?
The law says if the draft is available, it has to be produced within 10 days.
Within 10
days. It doesn't say when the draft has to be produced. But I will get into, you're getting into the public records end of things, which is something that I'll get right to. So approved minutes need to be forwarded to the town clerk's office. That's really important because then we can post them online and also print out a copy, a permanent copy. So the definitions, we've gone over most of these, so I think I might just jump past them because you can look at them and that way we can get to public records and move on because I've taken up way too much time. Let me just go through. Let me just touch on open meeting law complaints. It's a very formal process. The complaint has to be filed with your board or committee on an official form within 30 days of the violation occurring or knowledge of the violation occurring. The committee has 14 days to respond, and you respond to the complainant and to the Attorney General's office. It's a good idea if you have a complaint to let the committee staff person and or the town clerk's office know because we can help you through that process. And it is about process. That open meeting law is all about the process of how you came to post the meeting minutes. Did you discuss something that wasn't on the agenda? Those are all the types of things that can lead to complaints. And these are some examples, but I think I will move on. Open meeting law has training videos online. They're short little 10, 15-minute snippets, and they're really, really helpful. So if you have a chance, that's a really good place to go to look. And they have contact information, and they respond to emails. They want to hear from you before the meeting if there's any concern about something. It's so much easier to postpone a meeting, an agenda item, than to try to backtrack and figure out how to fix something. So public records law, FOIA is for federal records only. Public records law is for Massachusetts. What is considered a public record? Pretty much everything that has to do with government business. Voicemails, phone calls, email, meeting notes, texts, tweets, all of those things. There are, and material, as I said, discussed or referred to at a meeting. There are exemptions, but it's up to the custodian to state what the exemption is. Yes, sorry.
Did you say how long you had to keep meeting notes for? Was it 6 months? Is that what you said?
That is the material that is referred to or used at the meeting. So not the notes so much as the documents that are let's say the evidentiary material of what you actually discussed. So if there was a report, there was correspondence, there's anything that becomes material to your discussion, you have to keep that together for 6 months.
Okay.
That's
So say if the clerk or chair just takes notes, which they refer to write the minutes, they don't have to keep those notes as a public record.
right. The notes that the clerk takes or the minute taker takes are the public record right after the meeting. If someone asks for them, they have to be produced within 10 business days. Once the draft minutes are prepared, you don't need the notes anymore because you've got the draft minutes. Then the draft minutes become the public record. Once the minutes are approved, you don't need the draft minutes or the notes anymore because now you have the official record. And that's what you would provide. Yes? If you still have them? Because it's about the public records law. Right. If you still have them, because you're not required to keep them after
I
you
mean
have.
at the time. If someone asks for the notes,
Yes.
they have to make a formal request for the notes before the draft minutes are produced.
If someone has made a request for the notes, and within the 10 calendar days, for instance, you will be doing draft minutes, someone still has asked for the notes. Therefore, they have a right to access the notes. Does that answer the question? Yeah, okay. So if you receive a public records request, that can be verbally, in writing, in any manner. It's just that if someone asks for a record verbally and they don't put it in writing, they don't have any grounds to appeal. And so if someone puts it in writing, let us know, because we can get involved with, all department heads are records access officers. So if I get a request, I log in the request, and then I send it to the appropriate departments, who then, if they're staffing a committee, can get that information from the committee members, and we can compile it in, as quickly as possible. 10 calendar days is the outer limit. We try to get public records processed as quickly as possible. If we don't respond to a public records request, then a person can complain to the supervisor of public records. If they're not satisfied with our response, then they can appeal. We have that language at the bottom of the response to the public records request. We don't have to create a report to respond to a public records request. And if we don't have it, then we state that. People can't ask for a record that doesn't yet exist. To say, I want all the monthly, we get requests for building permits. You know, I want a monthly account of all building permits moving forward. Well, the record doesn't exist. So if you want it, you have to ask for it. It has to exist in order to produce it. So in conclusion, let's remember that committee work is official and public business and has to be conducted and documented with that in mind. It's important to work in cooperation with your appointing authority and town staff, as well as other committees, as your committee charge requires or as need arises. And as a reminder, the documents that you are creating, the minutes that you're creating, are very important for the work that is being done now, but also many years from now, people will be referring back to that. Thank you.
So now is a great time, or we have about 5 minutes here, and needing a few more, maybe we'll steal them, for general questions. You can line up here, or I can just pass this around.
How could I'd like to acquire an email, a Concord email, so that my private email isn't subpoenaed or discovered.
We can arrange that with the IT department. I believe that's the process. I think that every committee member is entitled to a town email. But if the request goes to your, is asking about your private email, it is only that government-related email. But you are still absolutely entitled to a town email.
Have any surveys or estimates ever been done on how much time individual committee members spend on committee business?
I'm sure it hasn't. Infinite. And for that, we are all grateful.
Okay.
Volunteer.
Hi. Yeah, there's one thing I want to point out, which is that because committee members are volunteers, sometimes in certain situations, staff helps them a lot. They do the minutes, they do the notes, they write the agendas, and they are not always accurate. And when I have had this problem with the planning division in particular, I don't mind saying it all out there. And the board members are very often too polite to want to impose on staff any further because they are already being helped by them. And yet, all those mistakes and the oversights happen. So I just wanted to point that out. I'm speaking here as a member of the public. I did serve on a subcommittee once, and I think also, by the way, our role as the member of the public is also very important because our committee members are volunteers. So maybe this meeting should be better publicized for that reason. I mean, we are all potential volunteers for committees. So, I mean, I don't know how the volunteers who are really giving a tremendous amount of time to serve the town can be reminded and encouraged and informed that committee responsibilities are ultimately the committee's responsibility. And if there is any question, they should not always take the staff's word for it. And thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
If I recuse myself from a meeting, do I need to leave the room for deliberation? Do you need, as a member of the committee? Yeah.
Yes.
Do you need to leave the room?
Yeah, you really shouldn't be involved in any part of the discussion if there is something. That's really the right way to recuse yourself, because otherwise you're still involved in.
So for the overall business of, say, the CPC, when many projects are being considered, as opposed to being presented and deliberated, you have to leave the final deliberations about the selection for recommendations, because several people have recused themselves. So that's a confusing one to me.
That's a great legal question. I don't have an answer. I think that's really complicated, and I don't have an answer, and I think that's worth pursuing further, because a lot of people probably want to know, because that can happen. If everyone had a conflict, there is a rule that you can invoke that would allow, with permission of the Ethics Commission, for something to still happen, because otherwise the committee work cannot be done. But it's all with full disclosure and with guidance from the Ethics Commission and probably Town Council. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, real quick, two things. One is with regard to public, open meeting law and public presence at the meeting, in terms of, for a regular public meeting of a committee versus a public hearing, in both cases, if a lot of public show up, it's a small room, it's packed, and there are 20 people out in the hallway who can't really hear what's going on. I guess if it's a public hearing, they need to find another room. If it's a public meeting, do they need to find another room or not? And if so, who initiates that? Can a member of the public request that, or it's totally up to the chair whether they want to do that?
The public has a right to attend meetings. If the public can't access the meeting, that is a problem. So the public absolutely has a right to request moving the meeting.
Although, I mean, in practical cases, right, not every building that we have in Concord could potentially hold every public meeting that we're hosting. So sometimes it's, unintended consequences. How do you deal with that?
Well, if you are over capacity in a space, sometimes you have to repost the meeting for another date when you have a larger space. Sometimes you can't anticipate the level of interest in an item, and you need to respond to allow for full public attendance. Sometimes you can use another room and have the meeting displayed on a screen, like if you have anticipated that, so that people have access to what's happening at the meeting.
Okay, I'm going to keep us somewhat on time here, and
Can you come forward and help us get to the next?
invite our brilliant town moderator to come and walk us through the process of town meeting. It was a privilege for me to prepare for this, because boy, I learned more about town meeting, and I've been to a lot of them. It's a complicated process, but it's our democracy, and I think it'll be very interesting to even those who have been town meeting junkies for a long time.
Thank you, Jane. I guess I'm going to knee roll us through the town meeting presentation rather than walk us through. But so I'm going to start giving just a brief overview of the context of town meeting, because by the time we get to town meeting in April, there's actually been a good 9 months of work that's gone into everything that we do at town meeting. So I'll split that quickly into a few phases of all the work that goes into getting to town meeting. And in our town, committees and boards have a huge role in getting to town meeting, because so much of our governance is done by our volunteer boards and committees. So the development of proposals, wherever they come from, have virtually all been touched by a board or committee or multiple boards and committees by the time they get to the public at large to decide what to do about them on the floor of town meeting. Okay, so let me just see. Okay, so really in August, people get to take a couple months off after town meeting, but really in August, we get started with the town meeting cycle for the following year. In particular, there's a huge effort that goes into the budgeting process for the town and the regional school, the regional high school, and the Concord Public Schools. And the Finance Committee is intimately involved in that. Every department of the town and every department within the schools are also involved in that process. The Community Preservation Act, that committee, the CPC, is getting started in August, educating people on how to present their proposals and setting the deadlines and helping people out with the proposals that they want to make. The Planning Board and the Planning Department, and sometimes with the involvement of the Zoning Board of Appeals, are all getting started with what they're going to be doing for new proposals or for zoning bylaw edits, looking at state law to see what needs to change in our zoning bylaw to address what's happened on the state law front. Any committee that is thinking about sponsoring an article, they ought to be thinking about it in August and developing it, because you really need more time than you think to get a proposal developed all the way through. So certainly by September 1st, by that first week of September, if a committee is thinking about a proposal for town meeting, it should be on your agenda. You should be talking about it. And you should be beginning to draft, and you should have involved your select board liaison. Similarly with citizens, if there's citizens thinking about citizens petitions, it's a good idea to start thinking about them in September. That's not always what happens, but it's the ideal time to start working through a petition. Okay, by the time we get to December, we've already done 4 months of work, and at that point, the warrant opens. This year, the warrant opens on December 7th. That's a week later than usual, because town meeting is going to be pushed a little later in April than we typically do it. The warrant is typically open for a month, but draft articles, it's good to have those right away at the beginning, because they may need some work before they can be finalized. The warrant will close at 4 o'clock, and it's usually roughly 30 days. This year, the warrant closes on January 10th. Once the warrant closes, we have a warrant review meeting with town council, and that typically consists of the chair of the select board, myself as moderator, town council, town manager, and in recent years, we've asked the superintendent of schools to be involved in that meeting as well, so that we can address any issues that we have in terms of language or consistency with state law, any problems that town council sees before we get to publishing articles in the warrant. And just a reminder that the warrant is the notice of the topics that are going to be taken up at town meeting. The motions that come before us at town meeting are the specific actions we're going to be taking on the topics. But the notice defines the scope of what you can deal with when you get to town meeting, and that's set in stone when that warrant closes, or at least when it's published. Sometimes there can be tweaking in the language, but it's set in stone by the time the warrant is printed. So the warrant then gets printed and mailed to households. Okay, Concord is unique in having a pre-town meeting hearing on every single article that is going to come before town meeting. The planning board, the finance committee, and the select board each hold hearings on articles that are within their respective jurisdiction. The finance committee, because they touch so many articles, split their hearings into 3, and one of them is on the town budget, one is on the schools, and one is on the enterprise funds. And the enterprise funds are those entities within town that are their own kind of separate businesses, but still a town department, like, for example, the municipal light plant. And the BD Center is another one, and there are more. So that happens in February and March. In March, now is when we need to have our draft motions ready. And the question often comes up whether in that hearing process in February, whether it's important to have the motion ready. It's a good idea for people presenting at the hearing to have the motion ready at that point so that questions and comments can come from the public on what that motion looks like, which will actually improve that motion by the time it gets to the floor of town meeting. That isn't always the case, and that's okay if it doesn't happen, but it's probably the better practice to have the motion, at least in draft form, ready for the hearings in February. So all the draft motions get presented in March, and they're all going to get reviewed by they get reviewed by the select board, they get reviewed by the town manager's office, they are at some point reviewed by town council, and they're all reviewed by me, and the town clerk's office also looks at them. The consent calendar is finalized. The moderator prepares this consent calendar, and this is the list of things that we will deal with in an abbreviated form at town meeting in order to help speed us along if they're non-controversial issues and routine matters. And I will make those recommendations on what should be on the consent calendar after the hearing process is over. And typically I'll come and be on the select board's agenda to talk about what I'd like to include on the consent calendar and get their input, and then we finalize that calendar. The motion review meeting happens with town council, and every single presentation that is going to be made at town meeting on PowerPoint. We have a PowerPoint for every single warrant article. We need it because our process is to use the PowerPoint presentation to present the motion to everybody so we know what we're voting on. And it's so much easier for people to be looking at that visually than it is to hear the motion read. So that's our practice, and everybody needs, and we standardize that in a PowerPoint. And that all needs to be in advance done for the town IT department. No one can bring their own zip drive. Nobody can email in their slides, and we do that to protect the town system against any kind of viruses and to do quality control on all those presentations. And also, I as the moderator need to review and approve every presentation, not the verbal presentations, but every PowerPoint presentation. And I don't micromanage these, but if there was anything that was wildly out of bounds or really could be improved upon, I would make suggestions to you. And usually that's a collaborative process between myself and the presenters, and I think we usually end up with a better product for having had that process. And handouts, any handout that goes on the tables at town meeting, they all have to be town meeting related. We have a couple of exceptions, like green cards can be on the tables, and certain things that the town clerk likes to put out there, but in general, handouts need to be town meeting related, and we've kind of kept down the noise, because a lot of things, a lot of people would like to put things out at town meeting, but we try and keep it related only to town meeting. That's been our tradition for a long time. And I need to approve those also before they are put out on the tables. And the town clerk's office does check. They know what's approved, and they do check. And anything that gets put out there that isn't authorized goes in the recycling bin. So that's just an FYI. We then have a presentation coordination meeting. And let's see, do I have a date for that? I don't have a date for that this year, but we... that happens typically a couple of weeks before town meeting, and you know, when I took over as town moderator, I really questioned the utility of making Dave Wood, for example, from the light plant come and sit in a room with a whole bunch of people while we worked through how much time everybody thought they needed for their presentation, and made a chart of all that. But you know, I think it's a valuable exercise because it causes us all to understand that we are part of a large project and a multi-day exercise, and that every individual small presentation or large presentation is part of a whole, and the whole town meeting process has to work smoothly and allocate reasonably and fairly the time that we spend on things. And it's really important to the public and to the quality of our town meeting experience to do that. So even though Dave usually ends up on the consent calendar, I still ask him to come, and he still does. So, okay, the Finance Committee report will be finalized after all the hearings, after the consent calendar is drafted up, and the Finance Committee report will include all the recommendations of the Select Board, all the recommendations of the Finance Committee on the articles, as well as the consent calendar. And if there's anything unusual, for example, a specially scheduled article, that ends up in the Finance Committee report also. And the other thing that's in there is the whole warrant. So that's the document everybody really needs to be bringing to town meeting, and that's the document every board and committee really needs to be looking at. Okay, in April, every board and committee chair should ask their committee members and their board members to put the town meeting dates in their calendar. And you know, don't do it in April, do it in September. Here's when town meeting is, put it in your calendar, try and be there.
And can I just and I would also, as a select board member, but also as a member, a resident in Concord, don't just come for the night or the hours of your presentation. Come and listen to the body as a whole. First of all, if you haven't presented yet, it's going to give you a sense of the general tone and flavor of town meeting. Everyone is different, but also it shows, I mean, we're all volunteers. So let's respect each other in the process.
Our process is also better. The more representative and more responsive to the town, the more people participate in it. So it's good to have a lot of people. So we get to April. Everybody's got the town meeting dates blocked out in their calendar. PowerPoint presentations are all approved, preloaded on the town's computer. Handouts are all approved. They're copied and delivered in accordance with what we need for numbers of copies and timing. Everyone has rehearsed and timed their spoken presentations so they know they can stay within their time limits. Everyone has done that, okay? And another thing we really encourage is, to the extent a board or committee in particular thinks they want to amend an article, don't wait till the floor town meeting. Start that in the hearing process. Go talk to whoever it is that is making the main motion. You might have a really good idea, and whoever's making the main motion might decide they're going to change that main motion to incorporate your idea. And as long as it's within the scope of the warrant article, they can do that. It also gives us plenty of time to vet things with town council. It gives me a chance to look at things, to rule whether an amendment, a proposed amendment, would be inside the scope of the warrant article. And it means that we're so much more efficient on the floor of town meeting with an amendment if we've done all that work in advance. So anybody who's thinking about an amendment, if you get a citizen who comes to you as a board or committee member or to one of your meetings and is thinking about an amendment, encourage them to get started. And they can talk to me, they can talk to Kari, the town clerk's office, about how to put that in proper form, and we're happy to help people with that. Okay. All right, so committee or board may be sponsoring an article at town meeting, or they may not. So let's talk about the responsibilities of a board or committee if you are sponsoring an article. You have to develop the proposal within your committee structure. It means it has to go on an agenda. You have to observe the open meeting law. You have to take and consider public comment on it. You don't have to, but you really should, and that is the best practice. It's a really good idea to coordinate, think about whether any other board or committee might have an interest in whatever you're doing. And if you are the planning board and, the West Concord Advisory Committee might have an interest, whatever it is a good idea to be in communication with those other boards and committees, get on their agenda. to have a conversation with them. You know, and as an example, when the Tax Fairness Committee was working through its proposals on the senior means tested property tax exemption, they knew the Board of Assessors was going to care. They knew the Finance Committee was going to care. They expected the Council on Aging might have an so they involved all those other boards and committees as well as their select board liaison. And their proposal was very much improved by the involvement of those other boards and committees. Really important to keep minutes up to date and posted if you're developing an article for town meeting, because whether you know it or not, there will be people following what you're doing, and they might not be able to get to your meeting, and they'll be frustrated if they can't find the minutes to see where you're at and to see whether they really should make time to get to a particular meeting because of what the discussion is. And so important to keep your select board liaison posted on what you're doing, ideally in September. Surprise is never a good thing when it comes to town meeting. Plenty of notice is always better. The Finance Committee also should be checked in with if there's going to be any kind of financial impact, any kind of budget concern, and it's going to cost any money to do whatever it is that you are proposing to do in your warrant article, then they will need to be involved. So specifically, you want to identify what that financial impact is, and you want to figure out where the money is going to be coming from, because the Finance Committee is going to ask you that question. And if you have a committee staff member, make use of them, and they know how to do this, and they know who to talk to within town government. And if you don't have committee staff report, well, then it's very important to be talking to your select board liaison, your finance committee liaison, and the town manager's office, because in most cases the budget item is coming out of the town manager's budget, or it's going to impact the town manager. And it's not a good practice for us to have budget issues that are outside of the ordinary budget process. So if the town manager knows that you're coming and you've got a budget issue, then we can plan for it, and the finance committee can plan for it. Okay. So ideally, by early November, you have a draft article, and you have been able to float it. And I will say the planning board in particular, the planning department has gotten, I think I had, it might have been the end of October last year, I had the draft planning board zoning articles. It was great. You know, we had plenty of time to work stuff through with town council. And then we have fewer reasons in subsequent years to have more articles to fix things where a stitch got dropped because we didn't have quite enough time to analyze it or proofread. So the more time, the better. Select board support is so useful on preparing warrant articles. Do ask for it. Committees and boards can have town council support on warrant articles, but that's really a town manager decision on managing that legal budget. And so all requests for legal assistance should really go through the town manager's office. Feel free to ask, and you're usually yes is going to be the answer, but it's really important for that gatekeeper to be in charge of the legal budget. And then we have typically a town meeting preview meeting. I don't know, is that scheduled this year? We usually, I think that usually, well, anyway, we usually have one of those. And if you know you have a proposal under discussion, that's a good time to appear and give everyone a heads up that that is coming, even if it's not fully fleshed out. December 7th, thank you. December 7th is the town preview meeting. Okay. Town meeting preview meeting. Okay, so then you've got to finalize your article for the warrant. And again, the warrant article is the notice of what the topic is going to be. The town meeting is going to be asked to act on. And the way to think about that is when people read the warrant article, they need to be able to decide whether I care about this enough, or this impacts me, or this impacts my business, so that I want to be there on the floor of town meeting, or I want to be at the hearings. And if it doesn't, and I'll just give you as an example, we had our home rule petition articles for setting aside portions of real estate taxes to support affordable housing. The warrant article talked only about residential transfers, and at some point later on there was a discussion about amending that to include commercial transfers, but it wasn't in the warrant article. And looking at it as the moderator, I could not see that the warrant article gave adequate notice to people who owned commercial property to understand that that was what was going to be taken up at town meeting, and so that amendment could not be made. So that's just kind of an example of how those things interact, the motion and the warrant article, and what is the meaning. Scope is can be a fuzzy, it can be a little bit fraught. There's definitely judgment calls in scope. And I will say that I almost always consult with town council on scope issues, but even after consulting with town council, there's still a whole lot of gray area, and then it's the moderator's call on whether we're in scope or out. Okay, so the article typically will have or take any other action relative thereto in its language. And that is language that gives us a little bit of wiggle room to vary slightly from the specifics that are in a warrant article in the motion. It doesn't, again, that touchstone is noticed, so it doesn't give us a wholesale license to deviate, but it gives us a little wiggle room. The same with numbers. Almost always we have a specific number in our warrant articles. And in that case, I will allow a little bit of deviation from that number, but some people use a 10% rule of thumb, but 10% of a really big number could be out of scope. 10% of a really small number is probably okay. But so it's if there's a specific number, you got to be really close to it in the end. And if there's not a specific number, and sometimes that happens with, for example, a recreation budget, sometimes we don't see that number because they don't know until we get to the hearings, and then that gets presented at the hearings. And then the notice has been, we're going to appropriate a recreation budget under the enterprise article. Okay, the draft articles this year will be due by December 16. The final articles will be due before the warrant closes on January 10th. Okay. Again, good idea to have the motions ready, at least in a draft form, even if they aren't finalized, for the hearings. Think about hearings. If you're a board or committee member presenting at a hearing, that's an opportunity to rehearse your presentation for town meeting. And so it's a good idea to have it in as an advanced form as you can, so to take the time to tighten it up a little bit and to see how much time you really need to get out the gist of what your proposal is. And if you're using PowerPoint slides on the website, on town website under the town meeting tab, we have a great template there. You can just download that onto your computer and then just follow along, and it tells you where you're going to stay. PowerPoint is idiot-proof, and I'm an idiot who can attest to the idiot-proofness of the PowerPoint program. And the template's very useful, and using it will ensure that your presentation looks like everybody else's. It's easier for people to look at, and it also makes sure that your print isn't too small to be seen or off the edge of the screen. And I will say, when I send presentations back to people, by far the most frequent reason is because they made the type too small. And we have a guideline. You can't make the type below a certain font size, and because you can't see it. You can't even see it if you're sitting in the front row. So I will send it back. if the font size is too small, and you will have to figure out how to put less on a slide. Okay. And the comments and questions that you're going to get at the hearing process really help you improve on your presentation for town meeting, and may inform you on how to shape your motion. If you can tell that the public sentiment is pushing strongly in a particular direction, you may want to adjust your motion within the scope of that warrant article. Okay, so the finalized motions need to be submitted by a deadline. Again, it's the motion itself, not the article, that is being acted on by town meeting. In the motion, that or any other action relative thereto disappears, because now we're being very clear about a specific action, or any other sum disappears. Options on what a funding source might be, those disappear and you pick one. So we've now refined in our motion a very specific action the town meeting is being asked to take. Town council, again, reviews all the motions. If our motions are over 100 words, we ask people to print them, and again, that's because you can't see them on the screen. And we use those motions on the screen or on printed paper to make sure that everyone who's there as a voter at town meeting understands what they're voting on specifically. Okay. Again, the guidelines are on the website. We need moderator approval. There is a town meeting submissions email address to which slide presentations should be presented. Sometimes people have trouble submitting PowerPoints that are very large to that address because they won't send. And in that case, what you can do is just save that PowerPoint presentation as a PDF and send the PDF, and that'll work for the town IT department to put that up on town meeting, and it fixes the problem of the sending size. Handouts get copied double-sided. They go on white paper, only white paper, and we will usually take a guess, in consultation with the town clerk, in part based on how much interest we've seen on specific articles in the hearing process. We'll take a guess at what we think the attendance is going to be each night at town meeting, and we'll ask people to have that many copies ready. And, you know, if we're wrong on that by a wide margin on, for example, a motion that has had to be printed on paper, then, you know, technically we really do have to delay the consideration of that article until we print up enough copies of the motion for everybody to have one in their hand when we act on the article on motion. So it's important for everybody to be aware of those numbers. Okay, town meeting coordination meeting. Oh, I'm sorry, was there a question somewhere?
With regards to the handouts, do you require an electronic version of that to be submitted?
So what we have been doing, thanks for that question, what we have been doing in recent years is trying to post as much material on the website as we can in advance of town meeting, so that people who want to educate themselves on the issues before they get to the floor of town meeting can do it. And having the handouts online is really helpful. There's a lot of useful information in those. I typically have an electronic copy that, because that's how people submit them to me for approval. They send them to town meeting submissions, and we will post that electronic copy on the website.
So if someone is watching from home, there's an electronic version of all the handouts that are typically on the table?
There are. So if someone is watching town meeting from home, they can go to the town meeting tab while they're watching. They can find all the handouts. They can find all the motions. They can find the finance committee report, and they can watch live. So you can get the full experience with your computer and your TV set. Yes.
I have two questions. Going back to actually putting together the motion or the article, if not everybody on your committee agrees exactly what the language should be, does the chair have the final word?
No, it's a majority vote by your committee. So,
Majority vote, but it
yes.
doesn't have to be 100% agree.
It does not. It just has to be a majority vote by whatever your, by whoever's in attendance. And
Yeah.
And sometimes, as we saw with the Finance Committee last year, they had different votes depending on how many people they had. But so it was a majority of people who are present at the meeting. Yeah.
Okay. And secondly, I'm a little confused about the language. So when you get the warrant comes round, you have the sentence or two about what it's about, and then there's usually a box underneath with an explanation.
Yes.
What's that box called? Is that what is?
The box is a shorthand. In some cases, most of the time the box is not hugely different from the warrant article, but in some cases, we will have a warrant article that's got all kinds of nonsense in it because bond counsel says you have to have it. So you're reciting all kinds of legal magic words, and to kind of sort through what the heck is this about, maybe it's 5 paragraphs long, you have a little box, and the little box says, this appropriates this much money for this project. And now you get it, okay, and then you can go back and go through and understand it in that way.
Okay, so the box isn't background information then? Can it be used in that way to explain why the motion is important?
Sometimes I think that an explanatory box does end up including some background and some information. So let's take, for example, a local option, the senior means tested property tax exclusion. If I remember correctly, I think that little box probably had a little explanation of, okay, town meeting has acted on this a couple of different times, and we got this back from the legislature, and now we're at the stage where we're asking the town to adopt the bylaw. And so in that kind of case, you might have a little bit of background so people can put it in context.
So when drafting our articles, should we just put that together as we think makes sense, and then we'll get a lot of feedback on?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Was there anybody else? No. Okay. All right. So town meeting coordination meeting I mentioned before. Everybody always wants more time than I'm willing to give them, and no matter what, I get complaints after town meeting on how long I've allowed people to talk. So there you go, yin and yang. Less can really be more. And the longer you talk, the more likely it is everyone falls asleep. So there is a real value in short, concise, succinct presentations. The town clerk notices every board and committee for a meeting for every night of town meeting. And that happens because you never know. Sometimes you know when an amendment is coming, but you don't always know. And if an amendment does come, you might want to quickly pull your board or committee together to say, what do we think about this amendment? Take a vote on whether you're in favor or against it, and then get up to a microphone and give your committee's advice to town meeting. And in order to do that, you have to have a meeting noticed, and so therefore the town clerk has already noticed everybody, so you don't have to worry about that.
So Carmen, in terms of open meeting law, if that happens in the process of town meeting, are there minutes generated for that board or committee that's just gathered to discuss?
That's an interesting question. I would defer to Kari, but I'm guessing yes, you have to have some minutes of that meeting. If you haven't actually convened, then you don't have to have any minutes. Just the fact that you're noticed for a meeting doesn't mean you have to create any minutes. Right? So again, do prepare your oral presentation if you're presenting. Do rehearse it. Do time it. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Back to where you were. If in the course of the town meeting you want to bring your committee back together again, you might not have 48 hours to provide public notice to the community. How can you pull your board or commission together?
You mean during town meeting?
Yeah, which you were just suggesting.
The notices are posted by the town clerk 48 hours in advance town meeting.
So you were allowed to pull your group together?
Yes, every board and committee is noticed as having a meeting on the floor of town meeting. So they're already noticed. So, and that's posted and everybody knows that, yes. And so, and in terms of the meeting being public, they're in a public format on the floor of town meeting. They can't, you know, if sometimes the select board or the school committee will go off to a little separate room within the high school before town meeting happens. And if they do that, that location is posted so you can find them and go to the little room. And otherwise, people are meeting right on the floor of town meeting. You can see the finance committee sitting at their table at the front, and they're all having a meeting, and they're, you know, so if you wanted to hear what they were talking about, if you could see that they were probably deliberating on what position to take about a particular amendment, you can go hover around their table. It's fine. So that's what we do in order to enable boards and committees to react real time to what's happening on the floor of town meeting.
Carmen, are you going to have electronic voting this year?
So we don't have a decision on that, and I will be getting on the select board's agenda to talk about it. I think that our new town manager has a point of view on the expenditure of the funds, and so there's a conversation to be had there. Okay, so do time yourself as you practice your presentation, and I commend to you Aaron Stevens's tutorial on public speaking presentations at town meeting, which is also posted on the website under the town meeting tab. She gives you wonderful advice, such as not giving feedback on the microphone and, you know, things like that. So what if you are not sponsoring an article? What's your board or committee's responsibility? Everybody needs to read the warrant. Okay, you all need to read the warrant, because you should be looking to see whether there's anything in there that your board or committee wants to talk about or take a position on. You should be looking. So that's really primarily the chair's responsibility, but every committee or board member should be doing that as well. If there is something that's within your scope or that you have a point of view on, again, got to do this subject to the open meeting law, so you need to put that article on an agenda, and it may be appropriate to invite the sponsor, if it's a citizen petition or if it's another committee, to come, or even if it's the town manager, to come and talk to you about a particular proposal. Again, invite and consider public comment on what advice or opinion you're going to have. And I do think that the better practice is to hold off, for every board and committee, to hold off on formulating their final recommendation on an article, if they are going to make a recommendation, until after the hearings are done, because sometimes things come up at hearings that haven't occurred to you before. So it's good to wait. And even if you don't go to the hearings, which I would recommend to you that you do, but even if you don't go to the hearings, you can watch them, because they're all recorded and put on TV. So it is possible to watch them. And it's particularly important to have as many members of your board or committee as possible attend the hearing where an article that you're interested in as a committee or board is coming up. So it's a really good idea to be there. Okay, so, all right, I just went to that. Yes, if you do attend a hearing and you're all going together, don't forget to notice yourselves for a meeting. And you may wish to confer together to decide what questions you're going to ask, or there may be individual committee members that have questions and they can ask those. You should always mention that you are a member of a committee, but if you're asking a question for yourself, that's fine. Okay. And if you do wish to make a statement about an article at a hearing, then again, that statement has to be formulated by your committee in accordance with the open meeting law. You gotta draft it, attach it to your agenda, vote on it. You have to do all that stuff. Okay. So there's three options You can recommend affirmative action, a yes vote. You can recommend no action, which in our parlance is vote against it. Or you can just remain silent. That's your third option. Those are the three things that you can do. If you want to make a recommendation, you can ask the moderator for time to speak, in which case you want to show up at that coordination meeting and get a time slot. If you just want your recommendation announced, but you don't need to speak, send me an email and I will announce your recommendation. And if you want to prepare a handout on your recommendation, you certainly can do that. And again, it needs to be submitted in advance for approval. We'll post it on the website. You got to make the copies on white paper in the appropriate number and get them to the town meeting. Okay, so, and there's my email address is just moderator@concordma.gov. So you can send me questions, send me things, send me requests to announce, recommendations, and I'm generally findable. So the last thing I really want to talk about just a little bit is speaking as an individual at town meeting when you are a committee or a board member. Nobody gives up their First Amendment rights by becoming a member of a board or a committee, so you're still entitled. If you're in a butter to a project you feel really unhappy about, even if you've recused yourself from your board or committee's deliberations, you can get up and have something to say about that on the floor of town meeting. It's really important to identify yourself as a board or committee member. Make clear that you are speaking as yourself, on behalf of yourself as an individual and not for the board or committee. You always want to speak from the floor, not to try and come speak from the podium. The tricky thing comes, I think, sometimes for us when we try hard to do things in town by consensus on our board and committees, even when there's been a divergence of opinion and there's had to be a vote. But once a vote happens, then the best practice, I think, is if a board or committee is going to make a statement, there's one statement and it incorporates the pros and the cons that were considered by the committee, the reasons for, the reasons against, and although there was a minority that wasn't in favor, the majority felt this. And then that handles that, and you end up with kind of less dissonance for people to try to process as they think about the issues that are before them on the floor of town meeting. But it's not a hard and fast rule, and sometimes there are individuals who have strong enough feelings that they felt were not dealt with by their committee or board statement on the issues that they really need to come to a microphone, and in that case they can. Okay. Yes, Anita?
On that latter point, I think it's, I think it really is a three-part. You can speak for the committee as a member of the committee, or you could speak as a member of the committee, but you're speaking for yourself. Or if the topic is not within the scope of your committee's work, you could speak as an individual. And I think it's that middle one that is often confusing. So if I get up and say, I'm a member of the planning board, but I'm speaking for myself, you're an informed member of the topic if the topic you're speaking about is within the scope of the planning board's jurisdiction. You don't have to be speaking for the committee if you're giving a minority opinion, or if you're talking about something that the planning board has not taken a position on yet. But if it's within their scope, I think it's incumbent upon you to announce that you are a member of the planning board, but speaking as an individual member of that board. And I personally found it frustrating when people get up and say, I'm speaking for myself. They really are not a totally John Q. public.
That's true. It's complex. This is a This is a complexity that we live with in our town because so much of our governance is self-governance by people who do have a direct personal interest in what happens in town. So we sort these issues as best we can. But the point is well taken that if you're speaking on an issue that if you are, let's say, a member of the planning board and you want to talk about the school budget, you don't, I don't think you have to announce yourself as a member of the planning board because you have no special understanding or a greater level of information available to you as a member of the planning board on the school budget. You can just be John Doe, who resides on Main Street. Yeah. Okay. So distributing handouts. I think I've already talked about this enough. So we really rely on our boards and committees for so much of our good governance. So thank you. Give yourselves a round of applause, please. Thank you.
Okay, so we're running a little over, but I also want to
Sorry.
make sure that we haven't hit or missed any general questions in the room. And the one I wanted to pose is, how do boards and committees interact with citizen petitions that may have an effect on or be interactive with that board or committee at town meeting?
How do boards and committees interact with citizens petitions that may have?
In other words, citizen petitions are a separate process. They're a private process.
Yep.
They're not open meeting law required.
Right, that's true. So I think that if a board or committee becomes aware of a citizen petition that is squarely within their area of responsibility in town, the best practice is to call up that citizen petitioner and say, hey, we'd like to put you on our agenda. Will you come talk to us about your proposal? I think in most cases, with citizens petitions we've had, the citizen petitioners have gone ahead and got themselves on the agendas of the boards and committees that will have an interest in what they're proposing. And then you have the opportunity at a public meeting to talk with them, ask questions, give them reactions, perhaps to influence the shape of their proposal, and then you make a recommendation or not as you see fit on the floor of town meeting. Develop a handout or not as your committee or board sees fit. But you can only do things really through the open meeting law process with a citizen petitioner.
Any other questions from the room?
Thank you. April 27th. It's late this year.
And we all know that means more days than April 27th. So put it in your calendar. Right. So, Mike, you get to bat cleanup and everything else. So what could go wrong? Gee, I've never encountered anything going wrong in a public meeting. So Mike will have to invent the wheel here.
Good morning, everybody. What do I do to make my presentation come up? Carrie, Aaron, whomever is responsible. Carmen, Sarah asked a question about the block underneath an article explaining stuff. A committee could also produce a handout if there was more detailed information about background and things like that. You're not restricted to that little, that's a clarifying. Well, there it is. So I have a few things I want to go through, but I want to be able to get to questions, so I'll try to get through this stuff as quickly as I can. And that's good with that. So I want to make first a comment. I don't see it on my slides here. I want to make a distinction for you before we start between a public meeting and a public hearing. So public hearings are sometimes embedded in committee meetings. At the select board, we would have public hearings for license renewal. But a public meeting is your meeting. The public may have an opportunity to speak or not. That's a decision the committee makes. Obviously, we should try to allow that to happen when we can, but you have the public's business to conduct, and that's your responsibility. A public hearing, on the other hand, is a special type of public meeting, which is purposely intended to collect public input, and the public has a right to be heard at those meetings. So if you're having a public meeting, the school committee, for example, has public comments as almost a very first agenda item. And they have a slip that they ask people to fill out to say, my class and I wanted to talk. The select board usually has public comments at the end. Those are the formal public comment meetings. So I just want to draw a distinction between a public hearing and a public content. So I want to go over these things very quickly, but 3 reminders about public hearings. The slide isn't here, I don't know why, but ensure that all the relevant information is there. So check with whomever staff is responsible to make sure all the information is there. Second, don't engage in ex parte communication. If you're over at Crosby's and you have an agenda item that's just a public meeting and somebody comes up to you and says, I think this is really whatever, that's fine. You engage in a conversation. If it's a public hearing, the public hearing is the time for them to give the input, not to you on the street. If they can't make it, ask them to send you an email. All right, so and the third is make sure there's no conflicts of interest. Specifically, if you're a committee member, look at the items and ask yourself the question. So those 3 things are public hearing, I think, good information. All right, this stuff. You've gone over this stuff with Carrie when she talked about it. Read the committee charge, understand what your responsibilities are. Think very carefully about citizen versus committee responsibilities. You're there to conduct the public business. The citizens are there to hear about this and when there's an opportunity for them to comment. Review the committee handbook. Just pay attention and less trouble will happen to you. The committee charge is something the select board or the town manager or statute is prepared, so it outlines your responsibilities. Carrie's gone over appointments and committee responsibilities. Pay attention to open meeting law and public records law. The trouble I've seen committees get into with open meeting laws are, for the most part, inadvertent, but serial communication. Cynthia talks to me about something, and then I see Wally the next day, and I say, yeah, well, that's not allowed. So I think that's the one that I think we all need to work harder on is making sure our minutes are posted in a timely fashion. Remember, they're minutes, they're not transcripts. So you need to report so that the public would have an informed understanding of what took place at your meeting, but you don't need to say Mike said this and Linda said that and Bill said that kind of stuff. The meetings have to be posted. You heard that again. You've heard about conflicts of interest and open meeting law, so I'm not going to go into detail with that now. What I want to do, and here's just a set of things, but what I really want to do is talk about the process of a meeting. The most important thing you can do as a committee member is be prepared. It is really not responsible to go to a meeting when you haven't prepared. It wastes people's time, and we're all very busy. A lot of us attend a lot of meetings that we volunteer, so that's the way it is. But pay attention and try to do your homework. If you have questions about open meeting law, open records, her name is Carrie. She's sitting right over there. Don't think you know the answer if you don't, and don't ask your colleague, well, what is the answer, unless they happen to know it. She's the expert. Call her, write her. She gets back to you very, very quickly. The role of the chair, as you've heard earlier, the chair has a final responsibility for the agenda of the committee. For all of the committees we have in this town, and isn't it a wonderful thing? We have town meeting, And then we have this big committee structure, town manager appointed, select board appointed, where we conduct the public's business. We need to be efficient. So the chair has the final responsibility. If you're a committee member, work with your chair. Don't assume something's going to happen. Don't talk to staff about it unless you've talked to your chair first. If you want to coordinate with some other committee, that's fantastic. If you have a liaison, use a liaison. If you don't, talk to your chair and let your chair talk to the chair of the other committee. They may decide that you should talk, but if everybody just talks to everybody, it can get very, very messy. So try to use your liaison and your chairs as a place for things to happen. Time management. I'm a chair of a committee. First, particularly with chairs, look at your agenda. Try to map it. You don't need to put times. The school committee does. The life plant does. They put expected time that they're going to do. The select board doesn't. But even if you don't put the times down, if you're the chair, go through it and think about the allocation of time so the committee can be done at a reasonable time and you can get through your agenda in a purposeful manner. It doesn't take much time to do, but it really helps the process of the meeting. Internal relations. We're all very busy, but the committee is a group and it has a dynamic. And if we're trying to do the best job we possibly can for the town, then we need each of us to get the best out of our committee members. And so I think particularly as a chair, but for everybody on a committee, think about the group dynamics. If you know somebody on your committee is a little less reticent to speak, ask them, right? So try to make sure you've engaged everybody. And if you're talking about an issue and somebody on the committee has been silent, get their input. Or if they don't have an input, ask them to say they don't have one. That will ensure that you have a better decision. You haven't missed something. So make sure you've engaged all the committee voices and try to learn of that process as you're going along. How does it work? Think about how decisions are going to get made. On the select board, what I try to do as chair is we'll have a discussion about a particular item. What I'll try to do is make sure everybody's heard from, and then I'll try to see if we're ready to come to some kind of decision. Are we ready? Does this sound like we're in a consensus? You don't want to force it to conclusion, but again, you want to get the committee's business done. So my process is asking and seeing if we are ready to make it. Doesn't mean we have to have a unanimous decision, but have we heard enough? Have we heard what we need to hear? Are we ready to act? And so that process of more formally reaching out, I think, helps you make better decisions. Ending a meeting, always ask, is there anything else? Remember open meeting law, you can't just decide, well, we're going to talk about this. But the open meeting law does say reasonably, I forget the exact language, but reasonably anticipated. So items can come up, right? My personal advice is that's okay for them to come up, just don't make any decisions about it unless it's absolutely essential, time or health or public safety. But if an issue comes up, that's great. Indicate when you're going to deal with it and how you're going to deal with it. Items always come up. And so you just have to have a process in place that lets the public know. What I've done as a chair during my chair's remarks, and some committees have them, some don't, but if I know in 2 weeks we're going to talk about something, I say it at the chair's remarks. On November 18th, we're going to have the town assessor in to talk to us about tax rates. So I'll lay that out ahead of time. So the public, if they're listening, would have some anticipation, oh, that might be a good thing to do. Meeting evaluations. I just finished meeting with members of the select board individually. and not about the business of the select board, in case you were wondering. But simply asking the questions, kind of what should we be doing that we're not doing? What should we stop doing? Is there any kind of process change that you think would make us more effective? And I met with members of it, and everybody had some interesting suggestions. So at some point, it's not something you do, every week or something, but after a town meeting and maybe after the summer has gone along and before things start to heat up for town meeting and the like, you might take the temperature. How are we doing as a committee? And see if you can find some things that might be helpful to you. If you have assigned town staff, please work with them. But again, I think we all have to be very respectful of boundaries. So if you're a committee member, you just don't go wandering off to some other committee to engage in some substantive topic. If I'm on the select board, for example, and there's a natural resources issue that's going to come up, and I think it would be helpful for me to talk to the director of natural resources, I ask the town manager. She works for him. She doesn't work for the select board. So I try to make sure that if I'm going to go talk to somebody, I'm going to go talk to the chair of the school committee. If I'm not the chair of the select board, I'm going to find out who is and have her or him do that for us.
Mike,
Yeah.
what about the role of liaison in this?
Well, every committee in town has a select board liaison, and Carmen mentioned it too. In particular, if you're thinking about warrant articles, I'm the liaison to the Pollinator Health Advisory Committee, and I met with them, around 2 weeks ago, a week ago, because they were anticipating a warrant article, and we talked about it and the like. So use your liaison to get information to the board and ask for advice. We've, on the select board, been around a while, and we might be able to be helpful to you. Is that a good answer? All right. Public comments. We talked about when and that kind of stuff, but when the public is there and they're going to talk, the school committee first, the select board at the end of the meeting. But if there's an important item that's on your agenda, it's the select board, and it's not going to disrupt your meeting, and the public has something to say, we try to encourage them to say it, right? Now, sometimes that's not possible, but you try to do that. Here's what I want to remind everybody of. When citizens come to a public meeting and have something to say, some citizens are very articulate, know exactly what they're talking about. Others aren't. They may not be as informed as you are because you're on the committee. They might not have had it as well thought out as you thought you did. So what you have to do, I think, if we're trying to do the best we can for the town, is to really help and work with the citizens to make sure that their point of view is articulated and heard. So I think all of us have the responsibility. Sometimes it's not a lot of fun because maybe the comments are directed at you or there's disagreement and the like, but we stuck our hand up and said we'd do this. So when somebody comes to talk to us, our job is to make sure that their point of view is heard by the committee. So I think we all have to be respectful and reach out when we can to help the rest of our citizens do as good a job as they can. We've started to do more televised broadcasts like this one is. When I encouraged the Finance Committee a few years ago now to be telecast, there was a lot of opposition to it at the beginning. I haven't heard it recently. It takes about 2 meetings and you forget, right? But remember, you are being broadcast, so pay attention to what you say. But don't let the television inhibit what you're going to do. Just be yourself. So I went through these pretty quickly because really what I want to leave time for, if I can push the right buttons, there, is my glib wisecrack, what could possibly go wrong, right? So here's a list of things that might get you in trouble. But what I'd really like to do is hear from committee members out there. Have you encountered some kind of an issue or problem that not that you couldn't resolve, but that you think would be helpful and informative to your colleagues here in terms of and don't be shy.
And Mike, I was thinking I might, at this moment, as we get into questions and comments, ask the chair of the regional school committee to offer a few of the nuances that might make school committee a little different from most of the boards and committees that meet in the town.
Why don't you come up,
Nothing like being put on the spot. There are some things, one of the things I was thinking about as Mike was going through this was, we are governed by certain regulations, rules and regulations, and some of us are governed by different bodies. We have a responsibility, obviously, to Concord and Carlisle on the school committee, but we also have a responsibility to the state and the federal government and some of the regulations we have to follow. We have, if you ever are awake at night and can't sleep, read our policy manual. It's a couple hundred pages long, and if you want to go into the references, you can be well versed in mass law by the time you're done. So there are some of those things that are different in the way we operate and who we effectively report to, who reports to us, and we have to take that into account as we go through the process. We will invariably, we deal with some challenging issues on the school committee, and oftentimes we have very diverse constituents in the process of a discussion. Where teachers might have one focus, taxpayers might have another, parents could have another, administration might have another, and we try to work through those. We try to have open, frank conversation. We do try to pull information from everybody on the committee. Some of those high interest articles are issues that come up in front of us. We'll keep an eye on the audience. We typically try to wait until we're done deliberating, and then if people have comments, we certainly allow them to express those because it can help inform us before we make a decision. We are, after all, your representatives. And then if we have had situations plenty of times when we haven't been able to come to a clear consensus. We might be able to take a vote and get a majority, but it might be something that feels like it should be unanimous or more than 4-3, and we'll hold off. Other times we will get things that, as Mike said, come up in our need to be dealt with right now for a time issue. And that can be challenging too. We like to talk about something at one meeting and not vote on it until the next. So it's a particular problem when you have that approach and something comes up that's not even on the agenda, and you're going to talk about it. So we're pretty careful about that sort of thing.
But what would you say the biggest nuanced differences are between, for instance, the way the school committee operates and the way most of the boards and committees in Concord operate?
Well, I don't know that there's any glaring differences. I do think it's, we hire the superintendent. She has significant roles and responsibilities that are handed to her by the state through the Department of Education. A well-functioning school committee and school district will have a good relationship between both the superintendent and the school committee. I sort of look at our responsibility is to help inform and to ascertain the details of what we're trying to accomplish and make a decision and then support the superintendent and the schools in the activities that are taking place. We have certain things around, we're probably most heavily regulated in special education. And there are a number of things that we have to do related to that, really, we don't have a lot of control. We have to do them, and we have to do them in a way that supports our neediest students. And that's governed by state law. So, we have to be very clear. We should all have read that policy manual. Most of those things are in the policy manual. And it can be, I look at the diversity of what goes on in a select board meeting. And, with 60 committees in town, gives you an idea of the diversity of topics that can come up. We're a little more focused. We've got a few schools to deal with, and we've got teachers and we've got students. With rare exception, most of our issues are fairly well defined throughout the course of the year. I think that's different from what I see on the select board. A number of things will come up during the course of the year that weren't anticipated. Might form another committee. Who knows? 61. So there are differences, and there are differences in the way we operate. We do have, like I said, we have some responsibilities that, that in the end we're working for the citizens of the communities and the students, but that we have to deal with a little differently than the select board might.
Good. Thanks, Molly. So I'm happy to entertain questions. There's one remark, yes, Mary, one remark I want to make before we turn to Mary's question. Third Wednesday of every month at 7:30 in the select board room is the chair's breakfast. And it is a meeting that I chair, and the chairs of all the committees and towns are invited to come to that. I really think you should work hard to make sure you're there. It's a very informative meeting. It lasts 1 hour. All we do is there's no particular agenda. We just go around the room and ask the chairs of each of the committees to tell us what's going on with their committee. And in 1 hour, you get a pretty quick snapshot of a lot of stuff that's going on in town. So I really encourage, it's also recorded, so you can, if you want to listen to it, you can. So I think it's been a very informative meeting for me, and I would encourage you, your chairs, to be at that meeting. Mary.
I was particularly attentive when you talked about engaging everyone on the committee, because the Finance Committee is a very large committee. It's got turnover, and it's a steep learning curve. So a lot of the new members on the committee don't have much to say and the veterans take up most of the airtime. Listening, I just want to say listening is participating as well,
Sure.
Active listening. But what do you think about going around the room and actually asking each person individually?
Well, your committee has 15 people on it, and the select board has 5. So for me, going around the room is pretty easy. I don't know whether I would do that. I was on the Finance Committee for 6 years, but I think I would make a habit in a larger committee of not maybe going around the room, but calling on a couple of people. Cynthia, do you have anything to say? To try to bring some of the newer people into the conversation. And if you can go around the room, I mean, terrific. If you have a single agenda item at their meeting, last meeting I attended, you approved the temporary guideline.
Tentative guideline, yes.
I mean, that was the purpose of the meeting. So going around the room on that item to get everybody's point of view might be a good thing to do. Other questions or concerns or issues that you faced? Yes, Dean.
The second one on your agenda is lack of a quorum. When we think we might have a shortfall in terms of a quorum, we're sending out emails ahead of our meeting just to make sure we have a quorum. But in the event that we arrive and there is no quorum, it's snowing, somebody can't get there, what level of business can we conduct? We can't vote on anything, but can we have a conversation as a sub-quorum? What can we do while we're all sitting in that room? We've all come together. What can we do?
Well, I'll tell you what I think is the correct answer, and Carrie is standing right there, so if I screw up, we'll edit this out. You cannot conduct the committee's business. All right? So you cannot vote. You can't vote.
Discussion is not deliberation.
Yeah, you can discuss.
You're not deliberating as a public body if you don't have a quorum. If you're discussing something, that's different. It's not something that is part of the governmental body's deliberation. It will not lead to a vote.
There's no meeting, but we're all in the same place, and we can have a discussion.
Yes, you're a sub-quorum. You are not a quorum. You're not deliberating on the item. You're simply having a discussion. That discussion then you would bring to your next meeting where there will be deliberation. It doesn't take the place of deliberation.
But wouldn't that be considered serial communication?
No, because you don't have a quorum.
No, but
the further discussion happens at a posted meeting. Now,
no, but Carrie, if somebody, so Dean has this meeting and 8 people are there, or 7, right? And they discuss the tentative guideline. And then Dean runs into Mary tomorrow morning after the snow's been dusted off her house and says, well, sorry we missed you last night. We had a discussion about temporary guideline.
That's serial communication, and that is the danger of sub-quorum discussion.
So my advice, Dean, is don't carry out a discussion. And if there was not a quorum on the select board, we would go home. All right.
Got a question, Mike. Thanks, Tom Kearns, Vice Chair of CPC. My question is relative to access and budget for town council. Do you recommend that we use our select board liaison for that when we have certain challenging issues before us and we could use some support from town council? What's the best way to coordinate that from an
You
access
should talk to the town man. You can work through your select board liaison, but if I was that person,
yes,
and you talk to me, I'd say go talk to the town manager.
But start with our liaison
Yeah.
to town manager.
I think letting them know so they know, but the town manager decides whether or not council can be engaged.
Thank you.
So that's the thing to do. What else?
If I can just add, in your committee handbook, legal matters, the committee should take a formal vote to allow someone to ask to speak to town council. So you have to decide as a committee that you want to do it in the first place, and then you talk to the town manager and get your select board liaison involved.
Which is another way to remind everybody that no one committee member has the right to utilize town council independently of a formal decision.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not quite the legal thing, but even having committee members go to other committee members or other committees, maintain proper boundaries. Work with the people who are chairing these committees and the liaisons.
With town manager, we can clarify. It's not always maybe crystal clear to us in terms of the funding source for that within our own group or within somebody else's budget for town council. The town manager can
The town manager, yeah. If the town manager agrees, it would be an expense borne by the town. Wally?
I want to add one thing about differences that Jane actually reminded me of. We actually negotiate contracts with the teachers, both unions, which I think is different from the way that Select Board operates. We're also responsible for hiring not just the superintendent, but we do contract with the finance director and the special ed director. So there's, and those are all things that are dictated to us by state law, state statute. On this list, I was just looking at this and thinking about conflicts from the committee and conflicts from the audience. The last one first. Oftentimes when there's a high interest item on the agenda, there will be many people who want to speak. Recognizing that we are there to do the town's business, we will oftentimes, when we see that, ask that people who have a similar comment to something that's already been stated to either refrain from coming up or come up and talk about the things that didn't get mentioned, just to keep that moving along. We do have a 3-minute limit, which obviously we are flexible with at times. Since I've been on the committee this is my 6th year, and we've been through some challenging things over the years, and we have had conflicts on the committee. And I think it's important, there's only so much a chair can do when there are conflicts on the committee. It's important to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity to be heard. I think as individual members on a committee, we really have to recognize that, one, we're a volunteer board. We are there to do the work of the town, to be beneficial, and we can have strong opinions, but we need to recognize that the collegiality of the body is important. The issue that we are in conflict about will come and go. We will have much more work in front of us to carry out. So I think there's it's important to just keep that in mind as a committee member, that we really want to have respectful discussions.
Absolutely. And, differences of opinion are inevitable. So, that's the way it is. But you can work through them. If people think they've been heard, even if they don't agree, that goes a long way. I think most of the complaints I hear about, not formal complaints, but complaints are flawed process. You were going to do this and you didn't. And I'm trying to get my point across, and nobody would listen to me. Right? So that's the importance of process and trying to engage people as best you can. Having said that, no matter how hard you try, somebody's going to say, I didn't know about that. That's just inevitable when you're working, but you should try hard. Any other comments or questions, Sarah? Well, if it's a deadlock, you've got a few options. She asked, what happens, what do you do if you have a deadlock? If you have business to conduct, for example, granting a license by the select board, you've got to come to a decision. If there's a deadlock, there's a deadlock, and you're going to vote, and the majority prevails, whatever that is. If, when I went around the select board to say, are we ready to vote, and it looked like we were going to have not a unanimous or even close, unless it's really important that it be decided right then, what additional information do we need? Is there something you would need that could help you either firm up your position or change your position? If the answer to that is no, vote. If it is, get the information and put it on your agenda next time. So you've got business to do it. But if there's something that would help, it's always good if we can come to some close to unanimous kind of decision rather than having split decisions. Does that help?
That gets to Kari's comment earlier, which is the process of open meeting law, the open government, is not the most efficient process. So sometimes it just takes longer because that's what town business takes.
Jane, you're up.
Time. Well, first of all, again, I want to thank the 3 presenters. We have our a not quite able-bodied town moderator, and our incredible resource in Kari, and then Mike's wisdom from the podium recently. Obviously, when you guys all leave here, I'm sure there'll be questions. So, you know, that's clearly welcome. It makes the process of this presentation and this time frame better. One of my personal pet wishes for, you know, on my Christmas list might be that when we take the oath of office, every one of us puts this date into our calendars, because it doesn't matter how many committees you've been on. This is always a really good time. It's not just a refresher course, but open meeting law changes every year. And ideally, the operations of the town's business get better every year. So, and when town staff changes, we have nuances, new approaches to things that might enter. So it's always a good place to come together and really, you know, it's an opportunity to blue sky. How do we become even more effective as town boards and committees? The other thing I'll say as a personal point, which is everyone is a volunteer, and most of us as volunteers represent some of our own public interest or private interest, but as a volunteer, we're on a committee to do the town's business. So sometimes things get very personal. It's not, you know, as a committee member, as a board member, you might be in a position to take positions that actually are somewhat at conflict with where you would sit as a human, as just a resident in town. That's one of the internal dialogues that being on a board or committee is about. And I think the more we all respect that, the better, because nobody donates the amount of time that Concord citizens do. I don't know another town that has this level of skilled participation, and I am always amazed. It was one of the reasons I was so excited to move here 11 years ago. I just wanted to highlight a couple of the things I heard that in my conversations with the three presenters and today. One was a comment that Kari made when we were talking, and that was and it goes to the theme I just brought up, which is, remember, your board or committee is not your social group. And in fact, you may become very close friends with various members on that board or committee. You might have been friends beforehand. It might have been one of the reasons you wanted to join that board or committee. But it is not your social group. So somewhere in your own lives, you have to create that boundary, because it's really, we're all humans. It's really easy to escape in that space. A point that I think Carmen made again and again and again is that town meeting is not 3 or 4 days in April. It is a whole process. And the more we're all engaged in that process, the better it is. But and many of you have heard me say this before, my biggest request of all of us, because we're a small fraction of a small portion of Concord that are all devoted to the incredible democracy that we have in open town meeting, in representative or not non-representative individual town meeting, is to bring more people to it. I mean, wouldn't it be great if we had a space problem at town meeting? That would be a goal I'd like to challenge ourselves with. I'm sure the moderator would disagree. In fact, I'm looking at two, a former and a current, and they're both looking at me like, shut up. But seriously, we need more voices, and we need a diversity of voices. As hard as that might make town meeting, it makes it a better process. Then in terms of Mike's presentation, I think he covered almost everything. I think that the underscore I would just offer is we're all operating the best we can, and there'll be good days and bad days. There'll be things, I mean, I was recently trying to remember things from a few years ago, and I realized that it happened to be a bad period of my personal life. And so my memory isn't as locked in as it has been 5 years before or 6 months later. That is what happens. Life happens. And I think we all need to also see each other, even when you see somebody who's a member of a board or committee and you think, I disagree with that person fundamentally. Again, we're volunteering time, and I think it's important to support each other for that time that's volunteered, even if you might have a real knee-jerk reaction to what's happening. So with that, I'm just going to thank everybody and say, wow, it's 5 of 12. How do we do that? So you guys get 5 minutes back. Hang on, nobody leave yet. I see, I missed something. Hello. Okay, we on Saturday, November 16th from 10 to 11:30 at the Harvey Wheeler Community Center. We will be having How to Run for Office. We are going to have an opening on the select board. There'll be at least an opening on school committee. What? And the Housing Authority. So that's 3 openings that we absolutely know about.